Welcome to the Promise Podcast, where we discuss how brands can deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. I'm your host, Harald Lamberts, and in each episode, I talk to business executives, thought leaders, and founders about how to achieve effective collaboration across departments, such as brand, marketing, product development, customer experience, and support, all with one goal in mind: a seamless customer journey with great business results. Today, we're thrilled to have Rachel Lane with us, a former business director, transitioned into expert in CX, with a wealth of experience in creating business impact within the field of customer experience. Now founder of CX as a service business in the UK. Welcome, Rachel. Great to have you on the show. I've heard great things about you.
Hey, Harold. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. So before we dive in and do your personal introduction, we always ask every guest, what is your favorite brand and brand experience and why?
Yeah, I love this question, actually. And I think it's something that we don't talk about often enough. Everybody talks about the traditional brands that you would consider to be ahead of the game. You know, people talk about Amazon, they talk about, ASOS and, some of the other great vendors. But today I'm going to pick Costco. And I'm picking Costco because I'm really passionate about Costco. And also because it's got something special. It's got an X factor. It's created a loyalty in me for a variety of different reasons. So it's not just about the service level. And traditionally, like you, we're in this industry, right? And we think whenever we go over the threshold into a store or whenever we're online making transactions, we're thinking about it from a CX perspective, most likely. I certainly am. But the thing that I love about Costco is not just the service, it's the brands, it's the little extra bits and pieces that are not necessarily service related, but that they add these extra bits to kind of keep you coming back, keep you loyal, lost leaders, things like that. Excuse me. When we think about Costco, and I won't go into too much detail at this stage, but just kind of give you a quick outline, because until you asked me this question, I didn't really know what the Costco brand promise was. And for the most part, if I love it, then I'm thinking, well, I guess they've got it right. But actually, when I look deeper into that brand promise of Costco, it's built on several factors. It talks about putting memberships at the center of its revenue model. It talks about offering unbeatable prices with low markups. And thirdly, it talks about creating this efficient, streamlined shopping experience, which they absolutely do. There is no supermarket that can compare with the way that they manage their queuing system. It's unbelievable. You can be in there and the place is rammed on a Saturday afternoon and there's 100 people with warehouse style shopping carts in front of you, and you can be at the checkout in 4 minutes. How does that happen? It's for me, it's a Disney style experience. It's a little bit of magic. So I'm going to pick Costco.
Wonderful. And it sounds like they really put the customer experience as the starting point and then organize themselves around it. It cannot be luck that they have accidentally, enough capacity in the store to make it happen. So
exactly.
So customer-centric approach to organize their operations. All right. So so I already did your introduction. But of course, I'd love to hear it from yourself. Can you say a little bit about, what struck me about your profile when I looked at it again this morning is you've been a business director, a managing director yourself, and then turned into CX expert, and then after it's spending a lot of time at Medallia as well, and then actually now being a founder of a CX business on your own. So can you say a little bit about that whole journey that you went through?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should start by saying I've been a serial entrepreneur for 25 years across mainly across the software and SaaS space, but that started actually in retail, where I brought a couple of international brands over to the UK and set up in concessions and stores and things.
Yep.
But then as the dot-com boom started to really grow, I decided that that's the place that I wanted to be. I wanted the excitement of that. And, I was in my late teens at the time and looking to jump on board the latest thing. So that's what I started off doing in software and SaaS 25 years ago, and
Wow.
I'm just working in startups. And, for the first 4 years, we failed every time, spectacularly. And for each one of those was a different reason why we failed. And I start with that because I think, nothing helps you really hone your craft like a failure. And, we were all learning at those times anyway. And to be fair, I'd got a retail background and decided that I wanted to be a dot-com entrepreneur like so many other people. I knew nothing. And I think what that does is it gives you a hunger for excitement, but it also gives you the confidence that actually you will crack it eventually. And as a new business grows, you certainly look out for the hurdles along the way. So I think from those early days of being, a dot-com entrepreneur, I moved on to mid-sized and larger organizations and started replicating their business and creating subsidiary operations across the UK and Europe. And it wasn't until I did that actually for an organization. It was later bought by Citrix. And we had remote desktop control and web conferencing. And we started to see how web conferencing was being used in a selling environment and a customer service environment, that I started to really think much deeper about actually what's the art of the possible with this type of tool. How can we help customers help themselves? And that's when things started to really gather momentum and customer service turned into customer experience. So I was kind of...
That's a good point.
I was at the beginning of that process. And so I reached out to a number of CX vendors, which were all startups in the US at that time.
Okay.
And that's where I started 18 years ago. And brought one of those across to the UK. And I would say
your customer focus was like a pivotal point in your entrepreneurial career then, I guess.
It absolutely was. And I think, when you look back on customer experience and what gets you really hooked into it, certainly for me, it was actually my retail background, because if anybody owns and runs a retail business, they really need to be customer centric. They need to think about their customers very, very closely. Yeah. So for me to be able to connect that customer experience and the software game that I really began to love and was becoming successful in was the perfect combination. So that's how I started in CX. On the vendor side, I've been in CX now for 18 years. And I've worked both across the vendor and client side as well. And I would say, if I look at what a great day looks like for me now, it's probably one spent workshopping on site with, an organization that wants to improve its experience. Yep. Or, the launch party of a new program that we've spent the last 6 months curating and implementing. Yep. And when I say that, I'm not saying that from a technology perspective. I'm saying that from a business perspective, from making sure that, we've got the tech in place, but ultimately, what are the outcomes that we're looking for across customer experience? Because as you know yourself, Harold, outcomes are everything with this, and not everybody is looking for the same outcomes. So it's important, and that's where, people like you and I come in, is we say, right, okay, so tell me about your goals. And then it's when you start to dig much deeper that you really find that gold that for us can make all the difference in augmenting a program, right?
A great outcome for the customer and a great outcome for the business if if these two things can go hand in hand, that's gold, isn't it?
That's exactly it.
Right. Now that you're a founder of your CX as a service business, you're basically, of course, gathered a huge pool of experts in the field with specific specialisms, I guess. And then based on the customer ask, you allocate them to the right project, I guess. But can you name one or two good examples maybe of a challenge that a client or an organization was facing, where you place people in and where they really made a tangible business impact on the outcomes that you just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of give some context to this, so CX as a service, we're kind of an agile provider of CX on demand, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that we can go into any type of customer experience related project. It can be strategic, where we're helping design a program. It can be about making sure that we've got the processes and the governance in place, or we can be going in to try and fix things, or just, make things a little bit smoother, a little bit better, get a bit more visual onto, data and analytics and all those types of things. I think when I look back on, the last couple of years, and I've got at my disposal, you're right, I've got experts that have come to me, and they're similar people to myself, right, that have worked across CX, mostly client-side folks, so they've got specialisms, across a vertical sector. It might be retail, it might be telco, for example. And I've been very lucky, partly because of what's happened over the last 2 years, where we're seeing across CX departments, client-side, that budgets have been decreased. And it's helped me in many ways. It's helped me expedite my business to be able to bring in skilled people, but it's also created a fresh environment for us, for CX, to work in. It means that, the project consulting piece is now able to be a lot more agile. We're able to, yes, be reactive, but we're also able to come in and do relatively small projects or large projects, but at short notice. So that's what we do. And an example that I'll bring to you with is, I guess I had a relatively new, and I've got around 140 contract consultants on my books at any one time. And I had a telco come to me that I'd worked with previously, vendor side, and they came to me and said, look, things are going great and we're expanding, but we have a particular problem and we can't identify what it is. And I'm not sure whether we've actually got the data that will support us finding out what the problem is. They came to me and said, we're not sure whether we need you to implement new technology or just look at, what we've got. Essentially, what their problem was that they had a relatively complex model of both in-house contact centers and outsourcing contact centers. They had 4 in-house, they had 8 outsourced, and they were having a problem with just 2 of those outsourcers. What they did have, the data that they did have, showed that actually those outsourcers got the same training, they had the same tenure in place, so relatively low levels of frontline agent churn. So there were none of the typical red flags that you would look for, and they couldn't identify what the problem was. So what myself and one of my contractors did, we went in and said, well, first of all, before we diagnose and we really get into what's happening on the technical side, let's have a look at your processes. Let's have a look at what data you can give us. So they brought us everything that they could. The problem, and I see this so often, and I think that's why we were able to identify it quite quickly, is that when you've got that complex offshore-onshore contact center model, very often the offshore piece gives you different data. They're using different systems than you are with the in-house, and that that makes it tricky then to correlate a seamless experience and really track the whole customer journey. So we looked at what we had available, and yeah, sure enough, we could see where the problem areas were, but we couldn't see exactly what the problems were. So we were able to just run a very quick 6-week. I'll call it a POC. It wasn't a POC, but basically we were able to build up a relationship with these 2 offshore contact centers and say, right, we just need to bring in a little bit more data to help us create this cohesive customer journey. So we exported some of their data. We put in a little bit of tech to help us. Ultimately, Harold, what we were able to do was identify that actually there was a disconnect between the onshore and the offshore. So the onshore were doing the first call from a customer, and the offshore was doing the escalation.
Right.
And actually, it turned out that the problem was as simple as when an escalation took place in the last hour of business, that the outsource agents were trying to get the customers off the phone because they wanted to go home. That was ultimately what the issue was. And I think, something as simple as that, we were able to do a very quick program. Excuse me a moment. A very quick program that ultimately ended up by, satisfaction increase of, 9 percentage points across those 2 businesses, and a huge saving of over 2 million in the next 12 months by being able to just do that very quick fix. So sometimes,
what was causing the financial savings? Was it less customer call volume, or was it more less attrition and churn related, or like what was it?
It was repeat calls. I'm glad you asked me that because I didn't mention it. Yeah, it was the cost of the repeat calls. And of course, the difficult thing to measure on top of that would be the declining customer satisfaction, the net effect of that.
You can anticipate. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. But, it certainly in the follow-on calls. And I guess one of the things that we were able to do was connect that customer journey, right? And that's one of the things that we can do relatively quickly as outsiders. We can go in, we can explain our issues, and we can create, what on the surface seems like just a very quick fix. But
it sounds super recognizable, Rachel. I mean, we've done a project for a bank that I know for a debit card activation, and there were some instructions provided with the debit card that were leading to a lot of calls in the contact center. And just by approaching it from a journey perspective and being able to identify cause and effect, which if you only look at your own silo is very difficult to do. But if you look at the whole journey perspective, you're like, cause here and effect here, we can fix that. And sometimes these things can be difficult, but sometimes they're really easy. But it's just about knowing about them. And we also reduced customer service calls significantly. With and anyway, so very very much also speaking for more holistic understanding of your customer issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you're also sometimes working yourself as a fractional, what should I say, CXO with organizations. So do you also have maybe an anecdote or an example working with the executive stakeholders in terms of how you've maybe changed their mindset, or maybe really impacted a lasting change in how they look at things and approach it more customer centric in their business?
Yeah, I think so. And I really love the whole fractional piece. And again, this has really come to light over the last 2 years as a viable option for businesses that perhaps could never afford a full-time leader for customer experience. And what it's enabled me to do, and on every And in fact, over the last 2 years, I've done three 90-day fractional projects.
Okay.
And what I try to do is just do continuous touch-ins going forward. But I think, possibly one of my favorite ones was the first one that I did. And the first one was, it was a software company that was providing a platform to other software companies. So it was a B2B. And they'd never had anybody managing customer experience. So their customer experience department basically was their sales and customer success department.
Right.
So, so I think,
So more account management than anything else, to be honest.
Exactly that. And even the account management of it was kind of almost done begrudgingly. You know how the comp system sometimes it's either works for hunters or farmers, and this particular one worked great for hunters, not so much for farming. So yes, so what I was able to do was go in and just kind of really get down to basics with the guys there, and talk about actually, let's look at the whole process that we have, even though it's a B2B, exactly the same process will be in place for any B2C. It's first of all, understand your customer base, understand how they buy from you and why they buy from you. And then let's reverse engineer a service experience that will enable that, right? And this was a business that had never kind of looked at it from that perspective before. It had been very much inside out. So looking from the outside
more
in,
transactional, I guess, like more transactional and less relational. If is that fair?
Transactional. And they were really successful. And I think sometimes, when you are successful,
sometimes that doesn't help.
Yeah. So, we often talk about what was the points of resistance that you come by, because as consultants, we definitely, there's always some points of resistance. And when you go into an organization that actually fears expenditure on customer experience, and you can see why they would fear expenditure on that. If they
call it expenditure, if they would call it investment, it would be a different story, I guess.
Exactly, but that was when I joined the business and the executive team. There were 4 key folks on the executive team, and I only had one sponsor really. And just sitting down with the other guys and saying, right, this is how it's going to benefit your side of the business. So these are the benefits to sales. These are the benefits to marketing. And really going back into prior to creating the strategies, first of all, just getting that executive level engagement in place. And I think all of the projects that I've done have had quite a high upfront value in terms of, that executive sponsorship, because it's new to everybody. It's odd for an organization that's successful to bring in a consultant and to create a practice that they haven't done before. So we fully appreciate that, right? And we go in, very humble but honest, I would say, is that early.
And you said something really interesting in the beginning. You said customer service became customer experience. But there's so much in that sentence. I mean, because if executives have been educated that customer service cost is a cost, and that becomes a synonym for customer experience, then it's something they want to reduce. And if you see it as customer centricity and saying, hey, if I understand the customer, I can actually innovate more relevant offerings and streamline my delivery, so that will indirectly reduce my customer service overhead. Then you're, of course, on a very different mindset. But of course, you can't blame all the executives for not necessarily understanding that, I think. So there's also a big task for us, I think, to really explain and connect customer experience practices with that business value. And so that once they understand it, I haven't met any executives that are not all for that.
Absolutely. And it was, it was mind blowing for a couple of them, because when you start to apply customer experience framework, and you immediately look at actually from a sales perspective, you could probably expect a 40% uplift on your current customer base if we
Yeah.
actually proactively look after them. Then that's the sort of money that will speak to those
Yeah.
projects.
But then again, of course, that's of course any executives would love that outcome. Yeah.
Yeah,
But then, do they also believe that this is going to happen? So what we often see is that also trying to start with like a small. I think you did the same with that POC example you mentioned.
yes,
Start with a small one service, one journey, or one target group, and
yeah,
prove that value. That of course also makes executives more comfortable scaling it up across the
yeah.
business, because of course they're also risk managing, to say the least. So I think, is that
Mm.
something you approach as you apply in your approach as well? Is try to find a well-defined scope in which you can prove some numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just look for what I call a pocket of pain, Harold.
Okay.
Um,
Nice.
and where I
Yeah.
see a pocket of pain that people care about,
Yeah.
then that's going to be my first story. So
Because there's willingness to address it. Is that what you mean?
yes, yeah, because they
Yeah.
recognize that that's a problem.
Yeah.
And they might have a valid reason for not tackling that problem, or it might
Yeah.
just simply be resource or whatever it is. But if when I'm having those upfront conversations, the early business framing conversations, I always pick,
Yeah.
2 or 3 of those
Yeah. Well, they
problems.
might not understand what's causing it, and I think of course, it's a human habit to try to fix things that you think you can control. And if you don't really understand it, in your case, as the offshore example, then of
Yeah.
course first you need a more holistic understanding of the issue, and then of course I think people will get motivated to address it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely what happens. And
Mhm.
you can create a significant story in 90 days. In every business that I
Yeah.
work in, I try to create my 90-day story. So I will start off by identifying what those pockets of pain are,
Yeah.
and make a plan for those. So that's my first 30 days is identifying and then planning. My next 30 days is really attacking those and understanding them more deeply,
Yeah.
creating the right environment so that we're getting the data to support
Yeah.
remediation. And then at that 90-day point, you should have identified, you should have corrected, and then you should be on to understanding what business as usual is going to look like, and you should be able to put a financial number to it.
Yeah.
So, and it might be something relatively small, but if it's an irritant, then that's an irritant that you can quickly take off the table, and it will buy you into bigger parts of the business.
Yeah. So it's a great way to start, but we all know that sometimes transformational efforts you can't do in 90 days, so they will take longer. So
Yeah.
and then if you only pick pockets of pain, then you might also get, okay, now you're like just picking some low-hanging fruit, but you're not addressing the fundamental customer-centric transformation. Can you say a little bit about how you maybe balance the short-term proof of value initiatives to gain
Yeah.
traction with the
Mhm.
more longer-term transformational efforts that might be needed to make it a lasting customer-centric, change?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, generally when we've picked these pockets of pain, we know from the outset that, this is kind of this pain that we're experiencing here is a symptom of something,
Yeah,
bigger and wider and uglier.
yeah,
So it's then for us to uncover the scope of the bigger problem. I think the thing what we've always tried to do as we go along and we look at these transformations is we look at it, people talk about crawl, walk, run, and it is a crawl, walk, run, but
nice.
it's
Yeah,
it's approaching the whole transformation in a way that the business can consume.
yeah,
And that's the tricky thing that we need to do, because the pathway is very clear of the 10 points to nirvana that we need to create,
yeah,
and sometimes that involves a change in technology, and if it involves a change in technology or an addition of technology, you've got a 12-month lead time before that can actually happen. So it's about understanding what the appetite is
Yeah.
from the business in order to solve that
And I guess
that
also be sensitive to other organizational big
yes,
changes or effects that are going on, and not be
yes,
ignorant to them. I guess also
yeah,
to get the executive, headspace that this is the right time. At the same time, also challenge, of course, the management team to not do customer centricity at the end, because then, of course, that's also something that is okay. Hey, we talked a bit about Costco already, but do you know more about how they achieved it, or is it just more you as a consumer experiencing it?
um, yeah. Now, I think in terms of how they've achieved it, and the great thing about Costco is, I lived in America for 5.5 years, and I was a member of Costco before I went to America.
Oh, you did.
And
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, and literally the day I arrived in California, and we arrived to an empty house. I rented a house before we went over, and I took husband, 2 kids, and my dog. We turned up, and it was dark, and we had an empty house with uh, 2 mattresses on the front yard, which I'd ordered through Amazon. I'd actually ordered 4, but only 2 turned up. And I had to get out and get to Costco and get, just basic stuff. So the beauty of Costco for me was going into the Costco in San Ramon in the Bay Area was exactly the same as going to the Costco in Watford.
Yeah.
And whilst many of the products from a food perspective were different, it was still, and it still remains today, it's like my homely place. It was my homely place because I recognized it. I didn't have to go through the
You
pain
can
of
rely
finding
on them.
where everything was. Yeah, and I think that's the thing that shows up with Costco is that uniformity is present both within the look and feel of the stores, but
Yeah.
also within the processes of the business.
Yeah.
And the business at the sharp end, and I talk about, the experience actually at the checkout all the time because it is unbelievable, but it's exactly the same in the US as it is in the UK. So it's all about processes. It's about staffing your stores to deliver amazing experiences at difficult times. It's those times when you see those 100 people in front of you
Yeah.
that you're thinking, if I was in, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda right now, I'd be ringing my husband saying, I'm not going to be back for an hour.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm in this queue of 100 people and I'm chatting to the people next to me. I'm not stressed because I'm confident that the processes are in place and I'm going to be handled. And I think for me, it's got those global processes that really help it to stand out.
And it required someone in Costco to realize that a great experience in the store would create loyal customers. Yeah? So
Yeah.
I think, and to prioritize your operational excellence in the stores for that reason. Yeah? So I think, and that it needs orchestration from a strategy to a executional level. I guess that's something that is with the customer at the center. I think that's something that is very easy to spot, maybe, but harder to execute.
I think it's virtually impossible to execute. I don't know
Yeah.
anybody else that can execute like
Yeah.
that. I haven't really been able to identify the magic that makes that work. What is it
Yeah.
that, when these things happen, and obviously it's a combination of things, right? It's a combination about, knowing when their peak times are going to be, making sure they have the right staff, redeploying those staff at short notice to manage queues. But
But
yeah, it's,
I think you're already making the point, yeah. In what you just said is like what
yeah,
you want to be as a brand, Costco, what you want the customer journey to be like across, and then and that has a link with how you organize your processes in the stores and everywhere else. But that conversation is not happening in many organizations. It's
yeah.
like process and service delivery is completely disconnected from propositions and customer journey efforts. And so I think then you're a bit, relying on luck to make things happen properly. Yeah. So I think, and if you manage your customer journey and then make sure that it's linked to what you need in service delivery to deliver on that, I think that's of course, it needs clear governance and orchestration in an organization, but that's where I see actually in many organizations things going, getting stuck or going wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. You mentioned in the beginning you did quite a few startups and also failed. You almost were proud to say that you failed a few times. So yeah, I love that. But can you share maybe a mistake that you made in your recent CX career that you would like other listeners to benefit from?
Yeah, and I think we talked about this before,
Yeah.
and said, it'd be a good topic to talk about. I think for me to just searching back for the things that are, I guess, what were my teachable moments.
Yeah.
And they weren't, that recent, but the problems are still highly relevant today, and I still see them highly relevant. I see people like me back then doing these things now. So what I thought I would mention, I guess, with the best will in the world, you can make the most beautiful plan, create the most beautiful CX program, but ultimately what you need in order to achieve success in execution and ongoing management of that plan, you need a couple of things, right? You need help from people. And I think my first learning as I started to build successful businesses was that you can only build a successful business with a team that wants to be successful. Okay. And I think what we're seeing now in the industry, there's a lot of young people that have come into CX, and because budgets are tight, they've been given really wide remits in terms of, we need you to lead CX, and you've only got, limited resources. You've got a huge range of things that you need to be responsible for, everything from customer journey management to data analysis, governance, and all of that good stuff.
Without the organizational experience to know how to approach that.
Yeah. Without the organizational experience, and without, other people to help you make it happen. And I think the mistakes that I used to make when I was younger would be, firstly, probably overconfidence, not so much in my ability, but overconfidence in the business that everybody was on the same page as me. Everybody wanted me and my team to be successful. And so, and I made that mistake more than once. I probably made that mistake 2, maybe even 3 times. So I suffered from this arrogance that if I do all the right things, we'll be successful.
How did you change?
What I failed to do was bring everybody else with me, right? And this is what really changed, was a game-changing moment for me, was the day when I thought, right, okay, I haven't got a big team. I need to create a big team. I need to find, where are all my people in this business that are going to help us be successful with this?
So you mean not even if they're not part of your team, but basically who you could be your allies in this efforts? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think this will resonate with practitioners today, in as much as we have to create programs that deliver value right across the organization. They deliver value across sales, they deliver value across marketing, they deliver value even right to the front end, the logistical piece. So how can we do that? What's the exchange for us? What are the deliverables for us to make them care? So I spend quite a lot of time up front now working with those department leads to say, when
if you're in a fractional role, for example, or if you're in or even in your own business,
right across the board. So whether it's you're a CX leader with now a small team, you're just going into a new role, and you've got this big wide remit, but actually more than just a series of tasks. Let's break it down to relationships. Build your relationships first. Do the tasks. Once you've got the relationships in place, let's make sure that we understand who is going to make this program.
So you're not the only one screaming in the desert. basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's two reasons for this. One is because you're going to need those relationships to get things done quickly.
Yeah.
So that's number one. But the second reason is robustness, right?
Yeah.
So right now, robustness, I would say, is probably more fragile than it's ever been. You know, I can't think of a CX leader out there right now that feels like their operation is business as usual and nobody's going to touch it.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we're fragile right now. So in order to create robustness, that's another reason why we need sponsors right across the organization as well.
I would actually add another reason. I mean, you're fully right on that, I think, but I would add another reason is by nature, CX is a very holistic approach. Yeah. It is the result of everything that marketing, sales, customer service, digital, and all the departments are doing. So there's no way you can do it alone in the first place. Yeah? You need alignment. You're actually your role is alignment almost to make things happen from a customer perspective, and you can be the driver for. So I would fully back you up on find your allies and lobby around to make sure that you're not working in isolation, but you're actually bringing people together to put the customer actually at the center in everything you do across the different departments. So, Hey, we're getting to the end of it. So, are there any resources that you use to stay up on top of these things? Of course, other podcasts that you listen to, or like resources or trainings that you give, maybe, or like other material that you consume yourself.
Yeah, I listen to so much and read so much. I would say, you know, my business platform is LinkedIn. Most of what I do is around LinkedIn. We create quite a lot of information ourselves. We do a lot of analysis and reports, which are available on the CX as a Service website. We also do business reviews as well. So we look at CX as a whole, about its health. And I've got one of those coming up in January. So yeah, well, I guess I'm the voice of honesty around where I feel that we are right now and where I feel that the next 12 months is going to take us, and you know, a realistic point of view of what we can expect.
No, yeah, I share that, and I think almost like a red thread through our conversation was really like show the business value, link to the business. In terms of people and stakeholders, but also in terms of strategic relevance, but also in terms of showing the business outcomes of the work. And then, of course, we're also, then it becomes also a fundamental, integral part of the business and not like a side discipline, if you will. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so this has been great, Rachel. I mean, and one question we always ask every guest on our show is, who else should we really get on this show? Yeah, like, who is a person that you really feel in, doesn't have to be a CX professional, can also be a brand marketing or a customer service or a founder or a business executive that that really would be interesting to talk to about how do you actually deliver on your promise as a business.
And there's somebody that sticks out as the obvious choice for me, and that's Shauna Kelly. Shauna, and I don't know if she does a ton of podcasts and webinars, but for all the reasons that I've just talked about in terms of creating teams, getting engagement right across a business, Shauna Kelly is the one that, she's golden in all of those areas. And she's senior director for athlete engagement at Dick's Sporting Goods. Now, you may not be wholly familiar with Dick's, but if you're ever in the US, and they're huge sports warehouses.
Cool.
And she's tremendous. And
what is her role? Do you know her current role?
Yeah, she's a senior director of athlete engagement.
Oh, athlete engagement. Okay.
Yeah, athlete engagement, to avoid any confusion, is customer engagement, right? Their customers are called athletes. But
That
yeah,
sounds great. I will. Let's talk. If you can introduce me to her, or I can engage. I can engage with her. So
yeah,
sounds great. I mean, and we want people on the show from all the different disciplines. The whole point of the show is really to get more alignment between marketing, brand engagement, customer experience, service delivery, because in the end, that is going to deliver the great customer experience and business impact. I'm
exactly.
convinced of. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to get across. So thank you, Rachel. It's been a real pleasure. Is there any final words that you want to share with the audience, or are you good?
Uh, I'm pretty good. I would think, I always like to leave podcasts and webinars and things with one final point, and it's almost always the same point: is that whatever we do, we have to find the story in what we do, right? We have to find the success story, the failure story. We have to share those stories internally. We have to keep the PR up on CX.
Right.
And that's always my leading line: keep the PR up on CX.
Yeah, and I like the storytelling approach there to really also make it more understandable and not only so factual. Yeah, so I think it's also stories are memorized much better. So I think it's also if I like that suggestion. So with that, Rachel, thank you so much for your contribution today, and we'll stay in touch. I'm sure I'm going to follow you on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
So that was another episode of the Promise Podcast, where we discuss effective ways for brands to deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a review. Check haroldlammers.com for more great content. Hope to see you again in the next episode. Until then, keep pushing to deliver on the promise.